There's a place, a school, an institution where a professor resides. One that for the past 30 years has traveled the world teaching others. A pioneer in America of the fighting science of Savate. One who codified the sports of this fighting style. One who has produced clubs, champions, and continues to develop. Listen to words of Professor Buitron.
Hope you guys are doing well. I want to wish everybody a great Thanksgiving. Also, we have some great questions coming in. We got a bunch of stuff that we're trying to do. We have people asking about how do they get involved with learning Danse through Savate. Well, it's very simple. You can go on YouTube and you can check. There's different memberships you can join. You can join the group Blue Glove curriculum, or you can join all the way up to white glove curriculum. I think there's all the way up to yellow. There's other stuff that we put out there periodically. So it's not bad. It won't break your bank, and you'll learn the system well in there as well. The question that I got here was, who do you think was the toughest fighter? Wow. Before my time in Savate inside, there were many tough fighters, okay? During my era, there were a lot of fighters in there that were very tough, and now there are still some tough guys. They're tough guys all the time. They're tough guys in the ring. But I'm going to join that with another question that came in. He goes, is it true that there was once a Savate fighter that broke his arm and continued fighting and won the fight? Yes. So I'm going to put both of those together. So one of the toughest fighters of Savate, and the professor, and it's a good friend of mine. I've known him for many years. There have been certain issues that happen, but we'll go along with what, and I'll talk to you about him. His name is Professor Gilles Ledwigo. To me, he's one of the toughest fighters of Savate, of boxe française really, that existed. Remember, at that time frame, the merging of boxe française and Savate had just come in, so they were formulating what is boxe française Savate, okay, the new sport, the sport action. A lot of people have confused, and I'll continue saying it, and I'll say it one more time. You have Savate, which had his own ring discipline as well as street fighting techniques. You had boxe française, which had its own ring discipline as well as fighting in the street techniques, right? Those merged in 1978 to produce a new sport, and that sport of pugilism is called boxe française Savate, or Savate boxe française. And that basically started, and the two major professors that gave way to that and put it together was a technical director at that time, which his name was Bob Alex, and great professor Hervé Berlandet. They put together the discipline of boxe française Savate, okay? And there were others that came underneath Berlandet that expounded and became leaders of the new discipline. My professor and my brother, Richard Sila, and I call him my brother because we're both former professors under Paturel, as well as Sylvain Postal. There's others that cross paths, Pascal Mazui. There's others that came out of Berlandet. Ivan Barboja, Sebastian Farina, my brother Francois Pinacchio, Bruno Godefroy, all those guys came out of Club Bellier, where Hervé Berlandet actually taught, but that's basically where boxe française really started. So that put that aside. Back to Gilles Ledwigo. Gilles Ledwigo started in boxe française Savate, and of course he fought in boxe française Savate. He was a great competitor. He was French champion, European champion. He fought a dear friend of mine, Dominique Daclouis, who was my brother underneath Paturel. And there was a lot of issues there in 1993 when I was going to the World Championship. There was somebody from California that forged my name and gave it to Gilles Ledwigo. Years later, in 1999, Ledwigo here in Laredo, Texas, tells me who that person was that forged my name, and We talked to him on the phone, and I told him basically it was a piece of shit. But anyway, besides that, that's my story. That's what happened. But Jules and I have always been very respectful with each other. We've always been very knowing what the art needs, but it was never being able to manifest into the world what Box Frances actually needs to be done. Nonetheless, we go back to that fight. In the 80s, the International Federation wanted to expand Savate so broadly, so fast, that they were calling boxing gyms and kickboxing gyms throughout. So they contacted folks in Japan, okay? And in Japan, they talked to them and they said, send us your best kickboxers, karate guys, send them over. They did just that, and the French team came in. The French team at that time, if I can put everything together with my professor, Robert Patorel, Richard Sila, Gilles Ledwigo, Pascal Mazui, Postel was, I believe, is in there. Charmillon was in there. I think Pascal Malice was even in there. And that formulated the team of the French team that fought against Japan. You have to understand there was no Savate in Japan. So the Japanese grabbed kickboxers, karate guys that fought, taught them a little bit of the rules, put them in the ring, and then send them forward to fight in Savate. Well, that happened in many countries. But in this particular case, all the Japanese were sent. And in Japan, they made a big shindig about it, that they were going to beat the French Savateurs once and for all. Well, every single one of the Japanese competitors got annihilated in the ring. Every single one of them was knocked out. My professor, Richard Sila, they all knocked out the Japanese fight. We came up back to Gilles Ledwigo, and Ledwigo was fighting, and against a guy that was a Japanese kickboxer. You know, Japanese kickboxing kind of similar to K1. K1 kind of evolved from it and changed over. And what occurred was he switched legs on him, and when what Gilles tells me, he goes, I was off a false guard and I blocked this way, and his kick broke both of my radius. Boom, at one shot. Broke both of them. So when I threw him a punch, it hurt. I couldn't punch him anymore. So I kept kicking him. So in the first, when the round was over, the bell was over, he went back over there, and the one that was in his second was my professor, Patorel. He said, my arms are broken. So they taped his arms, literally taped his arms. Okay? So he fought the remainder of the rounds with his hands up. And he was moving around with his hands up using his legs. So when you start seeing that, and you start seeing the toughness of a fighter, the tenacity of the fighter, that's when you know the spirit of Box Frances is, Box Frances Savate is. The toughness, we're going to win one way or another. We're going to be in the fight. That doesn't mean I want to fight. That just means that I love to fight. That doesn't mean that I'm going to go get in the fight. That just means that don't fight me, because I'm going to defend myself at all costs, and I'm going to continue going forward. So that spirit captured that in there. So to the question, is it a tough fighter? There's been plenty of tough fighters, believe me. Would I consider Gilles Ledwigo a tough fighter because of that? Yes. I consider him a dear friend. I haven't spoken to him in about a year, but I think he's done a good job trying to expound on the international relationships. What happens is, folks, you all do not realize that Savate, it really started, there was not that many countries that had Savate, Box Frances, okay? Pre-World War I, there were influences in other places. The French influenced many of the founders of modern day karate. Fonikoshi is pictured in one in a picture, learning from Legrand when in the military books français. So the Japanese military were taught books français, very well documented. The police in Brazil were taught books français, Savate, but books français actually, to combat against capoeira. I keep saying that to people. This is actually registered as a first school of Savate in the United States and in the New World at that, because there were no other clubs before that. There's people now, they come out and they say, I'm the only one I taught. No, you're not. There's always been here. So this has been basically like the catalyst of what it went out from. There's a difference between a club and a school. People need to understand that this has been here physically for the longest time. It was recognized by the French Ministry of Juniors of Sport. It was recognized by the International Federation. It was recognized by the French Federation. There's plaques that were given to us back in 90 and 91. So by Michel Roger and Richard Sela. So it's been in the Belgian Federation, under the International Federation, again, honoring USA Savate for this good work that it's done. So there's a lot of things that emerge from it. But back at that time frame, what would happen was they'll tell people, or tell the country, bring your best. They'll do a seminar at the country. 6 months later, they'll be fighting against those guys that they just taught Savate for 6 months. They'll be fighting the French team. That's, you know what I'm saying? And the French would put it out that, we're fighting the Russians, we're fighting an international. Here, they're coming from here, they're coming from there. Started getting their butt whipped. But what started happening, some of the countries that are closer to France, like Croatia, started understanding that this was going. So they started bringing the professors to go teach in those countries for the national sports. And they'll stay there 2-3 months at a time. Guess what? Their average or skill level of their fighters went up. In 1999, Jose Rodrigo came down to Laredo. We had the second border road. Okay. Jills came down because we had a couple of French fighters from the French Federation, and I fight a couple of the guys from USA Savate. Of course, we had some U.S. championships, and we had a couple of guys that we had in Mexico at the time fight. And we had a couple of guys from elsewhere. Well, anyway, I had a student of mine, George Garza, who was a blue glove. He knocked out the second of Europe, Talib. Okay, with a jab. And Joe, they got all excited. And I say, hey, finally, there's an American that knocked out a Frenchman outside of France. First knockout ever, because there was never any knockouts outside. These guys were always winning. And the first thing he said, no, he's not French. He has a passport that says he's from Morocco, but no. And I go, his passport's French. So we always joke about that. So we've done good stuff. That's a story that we can talk about that. I believe that if it would have been pushed a little bit different, the outcomes of certain elements would be different. Let me tell you what the outcome happened with the fights of Japan with France was that in Japan and Tokyo, these fights were televised everywhere. They had a big screen out in the streets that the Japanese were finally going to go beat the French, because they had gotten in the 60s, 68, a brother of mine, actually, because remember, I was formed by Roger Lafont as a professor of Savate. He had also formed Christian Guillaume as a professor of Savate in the 60s, like 63. Okay. And he was fighting in 68. So there was a connection there with brothers under Lafont was Guillaume. And Guillaume went to Japan and he beat up not only the Thai boxer, but also the Japanese boxer. Okay, so the Japanese had that element behind them that were going to come back. and win. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. They all got knocked out. It was televised. Well, guess what happened when they went back over there? The emergence of shoot boxing and shoot wrestling came out of it. So a lot of people do not know that because of the fights between the French and the Japanese emerged shoot boxing and shoot wrestling, the precursors to our MMA and Pancreas and all those fighting associations that were held in Japan back in the 80s and 90s. So people, there's a lot of things that occur, a lot of stuff that happens that leads to another sport, but they do not know what happened before. And that is just a history of what I remember, what I experienced, what I was told as in living my life in Savate and in France at that time frame. And it's just been a great road. I wish Jill Rodrigo the best, a great guy. And for all those you all training in Savate, if you guys ever want to come down to Laredo, please do so. We're here in Laredo. If you guys want to learn, send me an email. My email is wethrumacademy2012@gmail.com. You can see it in the description. Other than that, I'm gonna leave you with this. Be safe, stay safe, and always be at peace. Till next time.